Today, let's walk through a bias binding foot, how you use it, what kind of results it gives you, and is it actually worth using? Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are moving on in my presser foot series to talk about a bias binding foot. So this is probably one of the bigger presser foot that we have dealt with. As you can see, it is very large, there's a lot going on. So at the bottom, this is where you insert your bias binding. There is a little wheel that allows this to be adjustable, so you can make it larger or smaller depending on the size binding that you have. In addition, you have the ability to adjust the top. There's a little screw up here, and this will allow you to move the placement of the foot depending on where your needle is. Some machines do not have a way for you to move the needle, so this allows you to adjust depending on your needs. Now, compared to your normal presser foot, this is much larger. There's a lot more going on. So as you can see, this is almost set up as like a sandwich. So at the top and bottom, you have these little plastic areas where we add our binding, and then in the middle, you have a slot where your fabric would go. So the item that you are using to kind of finish off, that's going to go into the middle. Now, as you can see, this looks very different from a normal presser foot, except for that little metal part that's kind of similar. And then you can move this in or out, so depending on where your needle is, you have the ability to really adjust this to meet your needs. Now, to get this onto your sewing machine, this just clips on and off, so very similar to your normal presser foot. You see you have that little bar. You are just going to clip this into your sewing machine where that bar was. So really nothing too hard about clipping this on and off. So while I have it clipped on here, you can see I just press that little black little notch in the back of mine, and then I can put it on or off depending on what I need. Now, to set this up, it does take a little bit of time, so very similar to our other presser feet, you are going to want to make sure that your needle can go through the opening. So manually, crank the needle to make sure it can go down and up. It may be easier to have it on a center aligned position instead of a left aligned if your machine comes with that. If you have any issues with making sure the needle is actually going through the fabric, there is that little wheel in the back so that you can adjust this, and then we have the ability to adjust how much binding we're using. So now I am going to be binding a quilt today using this foot. So I have my fabric here, and then I have my binding. So as you can see, I already am going to start putting my binding into this. So those two little plastic areas, I am just going to be aligning my binding so that it goes into those little slots. So there's a slot at the top for one side of the binding and a slot at the bottom for the other side. And then as this double fold binding works, there is that fold that then goes in. As you can see, this is a little tricky to do. So I purposely left all of this in there just to show that it can take a little bit of time, and then you are going to have to adjust this based off the size of your binding to make sure that your binding fits well into the foot. So here's what my binding looks like. You can see that we have this little opening. That is where we're going to be inserting our fabric so that we can begin actually using this foot how you're supposed to. So now I am just going to clip this foot back onto my sewing machine, and then I am inserting my quilt into that opening, so where I had it originally, so that it can go in between the two pieces of the binding. Once I have this done, I'm going to put the presser foot down, and then I very slowly begin sewing. Part of this is so that I can make sure that it is actually getting all three layers, but also make sure that everything is aligned exactly how I want it to. So as you can see here, I have the quilt as well as the bias binding. Everything is hitting, and then the needle is right at the end of the binding. So if I ever needed to adjust this, I can just move it further out, or I can bring it further back in, and then I just tighten up the needle, and then I can begin sewing. On a straight line, this is very easy to use, and I would say that actually works really well. As you go through, I did find that you do have to adjust it as you are sewing, but really that straight edge, it's not too hard, and I can see why this would be a great option, as it does give you a really neat and clean look. Now, as I start to get to the corner, this is where things got a little trickier, as because you can't just do a corner as you normally would, like put the needle down and move it over, since you do have this giant presser foot that you're working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the end and leave about a 1/2 inch gap, or maybe even a little bit more, and I am just going to pin this in place so that I know where I want to stop at, and I'm going to sew all the way down to that pin, and then once I get down to that pin, I am going to take all of this off, so remove it from the sewing machine, removing it from the presser foot itself. I am going to backstitch lightly so I make sure that that seam is secure, and then I'm going to take everything off of the presser foot so that I can then do the corner. So once I have this done, I am now going to adjust my bias tape so that it has a nice corner edge, so folding it over at the corner. So you can see that this is what that straight part looks like. It looks really nice. So now at the corner, I have folded my fabric so that it goes over the little edge that I had left, as well as now sewing on starting that new edge. So For this, I have it already placed how I want it to, and now I'm just going to reinsert it back into my presser foot, very similar to how I did before, but making sure that the binding was into those slots for both the top and the bottom, and then putting the quilt in between. Now for the corner, I am going to be starting a little bit further up. So as you can see, I have the presser foot there, and I am just going to now attach all of this back to the sewing machine. And as you can see, this did take me quite a bit of time. I found this really difficult to do. I know there are other videos that show how you can do this as well. I just did not find it as simple of a process, especially when you are doing something that would have 4 corners, having to go through this 4 different times, making sure that it is all lined up properly. As when you get the fabric back into the slots, you have to make sure that you are still able to sort of secure that corner down. So as you can see, I put my needle down very slowly, and then I'm just trying to adjust everything as I go. I don't know if this is something that just takes a little bit more time and practice, but I found it really difficult, and it took quite a bit of time to actually get this to work. Once I did it though, this is what my quilt looks like. I think it gives it a really nice and clean look on the straight edges. I do not think I would recommend this presser foot though. Maybe I just need a lot more practice with it. I found the corner to be really difficult to do. I know there's other videos that do show a little bit more detail about how to do it, but I just could not figure it out. And it did seem like it took a lot of time compared with, just very carefully going down and sewing, putting your needle down, and then pivoting the fabric. Let me know if you've used one of these presser feet before, what you think about it. Maybe I'm just doing something wrong and I need to give it a little bit more time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next.